part 3 in a series of elected officials who represent our village. First we started with our county representatives, then our state reps down in Springfield, and now our Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, who represents Morton Grove in Washington, D.C. She's been very active helping Morton Grove in many ways, bringing grant dollars and additional federal funding to the village throughout her career. I hope you'll find this segment of Morton Grove TV informative.
Hello and welcome once again to Must See MGTV. I'm Christopher Michael, and this time around we're going to be speaking with Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky. She's been representing Morton Grove and surrounding areas for 13 years. Well, it's just starting her 13th year now after the last election, which she won rather handily. And we're going to speak to her on a wide range of issues affecting you in Morton Grove and some of them that are affecting the entire country. Welcome to our program.
Thank you so much, Chris.
In looking at your district, how large is it? I know it's not just Morton Grove.
No, there are about 750,000 people in every district. That's why every 10 years after the census we do a redistricting. That'll be for the next election. But right now I represent a good chunk of the north side of Chicago, Rogers Park, where I grew up, down to Edgewater and Andersonville and north. And then I have, starting at the lake, Evanston, Skokie, Morton Grove, Lincolnwood, Niles, Gulf, Park Ridge, Des Plaines, go pretty much from the lake almost to the airport.
Now this is a pretty wide, diverse group of people, not only economically but also in just their regular needs, and the business districts are very, very different. How does one person, even with a staff, represent that number of people?
We do have a very diverse district in many ways. One of the ways is ethnically. We have people from all over the world, immigrants that come from, well, at the high schools about 50 plus languages are spoken. So people feel it's almost like a magnet for people around the world. But also we have economically, as you said, and politically quite diverse. My staff is one of the, if not the best in the country, reaching out to people. We have not only our 2 offices in Evanston and Chicago, but we have our staff go out to public libraries on a regular basis to actually bring the office to the people. And we've served well over 25,000 individuals. We encourage people not to get to the end of their rope before they call us, because we can get cut through the red tape sometimes in a phone call where someone may have been working for a year to get through. We reach out to all the municipalities to see ways in which we can help. So, and I come home every single weekend and I spend a lot of time going to various meetings and gatherings and visiting with constituents.
From time to time, I think all of us have received in the mail a survey asking questions, and admittedly sometimes the surveys are a little bit loaded in the way the questions are asked. But do you actually look at those surveys and take a real honest look at them in order to then address different issues?
That's the purpose of those questions, to find out where people are really at some of the issues of the day, and absolutely listen to the needs and concerns of people. And you know, a village like Morton Grove, which has been singled out as one of the great places to live, I think it was in 2007, and I'm sure that's continued. It's hard sometimes for a village to get the kind of allocation of federal dollars and other resources. We try and work closely. We helped with the Dumpster Street renovation, about $1 million worth, and we're hoping to get some money for the Lincoln Avenue Metro station realignment. But of course, earmarks have become a dirty word. I disagree with that, by the way. I certainly am not in favor of a bridge to nowhere. The process may be abused, and I would like to see it fixed to make sure that nobody is asking for things that are frivolous. But I think that another way to look at earmarks are member-directed funds. So we know what the worthy projects are here. We were able to help the fire department here in Morton Grove. We know about the needs. The village showed us a video of what was going on at that place, and I know that that is a worthy project. And so I'm not happy that just across the board all earmarks have been eliminated.
Is there perhaps a different process for which this could be done? Instead of sticking an earmark on a bill for, let's say, the Department of Defense that has absolutely nothing to do with defense, could we actually have things that are considered earmarks to be introduced as tiny bills? So instead of having something that's 1,000 pages or 600 pages, we have something like this.
Well, I think transparency is the key, so that and we have that now, that earmarks put up on the website, so that everyone knows exactly how much was asked for, how much was actually received, the purpose of the request, so that people can actually go to check, and you know, as a result, you know, if there is something like a bridge to nowhere that's clearly just satisfying the interest of a particular member or business or whatever the interest is, that's not really a public interest, then I think there's an opportunity for everyone to scrutinize that. But why do we think that the bureaucrats in Washington would necessarily know better than the village, or that I do, and that what I'm told they need for Lincoln Avenue? You know, I mean, it's certainly worth making that kind of investment for a community, but how would they know that? And how then could the money be directly put into a project that is needed?
I think what this comes down to is a question of process.
I think so. But right now there's a one-year moratorium. The earmark for Morton Grove that I asked for got scuttled in elimination of earmarks for the 2011 budget, and then the president, who is a great friend of mine, but I called for a moratorium on all earmarks, not one earmark. He said he would veto a bill that had earmarks in it. I just think that's throwing the baby out with the bath.
So in other words, we need to find a different kind of bath.
I think so.
A lot of people don't realize how things are put together in Washington. Now, we all know the stuff from civics class. Someone proposes a bill, and then there's debate, and then it gets either passed or it doesn't. But there's got to be a lot more to it than that, because otherwise it would be too simple. And government can't do anything simply, it would seem. What actually is the process when you propose, say, $1 million for Morton Grove? What happens to that before it gets either thrown out or accepted?
Well, it has to go to the Appropriations Committee. I and my staff need to make a very clear pitch in writing, and often I'll go and strengthen that by asking in person to the Appropriations Committee. And then they look at the total amount of money for that particular sector, if it's transportation or it's human services, and see how that money can be distributed. And then they select among the earmark the earmarks that are presented by a number of by all the representatives. So it's a process of just going through, and I think it does make a difference how what kind of priority the member of Congress will put on it. That's been the process in the past. I think in general that it's worked pretty well. It's a small part of the budget, very small part. Most of those things are distributed by a certain formula. The money is given to states, but a small part of the budget are these member-directed funds.
I think one of the things that really got people upset about the earmarks was when you see things like millions of dollars given to build a museum to something that would seem inconsequential to most everyone else, or to build a new building and name it after a current congressman or a member of their family. How do we get around that kind of thing? Because obviously some of it is ego-driven, and there are some egos in Congress that can be very difficult.
And that's why I think that the transparency of it, getting that up there so that the public can actually look at that, it's for everyone to see, not just the ones, not just my constituents looking at my earmarks, but the ability to look at all of them and say, what the heck is the federal government doing, putting up a building so they could name it after so-and-so? Or, you know, does this pretty wealthy town really need the government to pay for a new swimming pool? Or something like that. And that in fact does happen. People have actually had to withdraw their requests for certain certain earmarks. But you know, when you see water systems being redeveloped or transportation projects that are going to actually save lives, I mean, what I saw from the video that Morton Grove presented was a real safety issue, not just a public transit issue, but a safety issue, and so you know, people have to decide.
How would, under a situation like that, the public find out about these things? Because there are obviously so many of them, thousands of them. You have to have a place to find out where this stuff even is.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do at our office is we help people identify sources of information. Or we'll send it to them. We'll get a phone call. How can I get a copy of this piece of legislation or that? Or is there a summary of this bill so I can understand more about it? Or present it to my club, for instance. And we'll spend time directing them to not a skewed kind of website or source, but you know, to the original source, so that people can get that information. And you know, we find a lot of interest in that, you know, and I understand that. I don't just want your opinion on something. They may say, I want to know, I want to go to the original numbers and look at it for myself, and we're more than happy to provide that.
A lot of talk has come recently about the tenor of language and treatment in Congress, and I would have to say, just from my experience, that it really hasn't changed all that much over the last 200 years. As far as I can look back, people at Congress were saying really horrible things about people from the other side of the issue. But is there a way to break through this and start working together instead of everyone working for their own partisan interest?
Well, let me tell you a couple of things. One is the shooting of our colleague, Republicans and Democrats. She's our colleague, of Gabrielle Giffords in Arizona. I do think changed the tone in a number of ways. There definitely was, at the State of the Union, for instance. I thought at first it was really hokey of Democrats and Republicans sitting together, but it changed. Of the 12 State of the Union addresses I've been at, this had the most collegial tone of all of them, because we were spread out. There wasn't really an aisle. We were all on both sides of the aisle, and I think partly that's because there was this common sense of vulnerability. I have to tell you, my staff and I can totally envision what happened in Tucson, because we have those events, and almost every member of Congress has those. We call it neighborhood office hours at a grocery store. And the last thing you think about is that someone is actually going to come with a gun. I think that in some way brought us together. Will it last? Well, we're getting to the budget and the appropriations issues, and I think, you know, it's not going to be all that cozy after that. But I think that there was no chance that someone was going to shout out at the State of the Union. Plus, we had an amazingly collegial lame duck session of Congress, where we got a lot of things done. So I have to say, so far so good, but I think we're about to hit the white water and it may be a little rougher.
We're talking with Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, who represents Morton Grove as well as several other suburbs in the north portion of Chicago. We will continue our discussion and get into some more issues that are facing you in just a moment. Welcome back to our discussion with Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, who represents Morton Grove and many other suburbs, portions of Chicago. Looking at the issues that are facing the country right now, one that I hear a lot about is the deficit. And when you look at the numbers, they are astounding. It would take probably the entire income and then some of many Americans to pay off the debt. What can we do to bring this under control? Because this is also a defense issue.
That's exactly right. As Admiral Mullen has said, that it is a defense issue. I had the honor of being one of 18 members of the President's Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. Some called it the Deficit Commission or the Budget Commission, that was challenged to come up with some proposals. But I have to tell you, Chris, I offered my own proposal and voted against the commission plan because when I looked at it, what I saw was not shared sacrifice particularly, but a lot of money being asked to come from what I see as a disappearing middle class in our country, and putting the burden on the people who had absolutely nothing to do with creating that deficit. Certainly didn't start two wars or give huge tax cuts, most of which went to the wealthiest Americans. In fact, it's the middle income people who have been the victims of the recession and the crash that was caused by mainly by the irresponsibility of Wall Street and the failure of government to adequately oversee Wall Street. And now to go to those people and say, we're going to cut Social Security benefits. We're going to ask the elderly to pay more for their Medicare, even though right now older Americans are paying out of pocket the same percentage of money, about 30% on health care, that they did when Medicare was initiated in 1965. And these kinds of sacrifices from the middle class further skew the disparity in income that we have in the United States of America right now. Did you know that we have the greatest disparity of any developed country in the world? Right now in the United States, now think about these numbers, the top 1% income earners control about 34% of the wealth in this country. The bottom 90%, that's everyone else, controls about 29% of the wealth. And a lot of that is not just the top 1%, it's the top 0.1%, the top 0.01%. There was a front page story in the Wall Street Journal the other day, I think it was a week ago Saturday, about a hedge fund manager. So he's not even betting his own money, he's betting other people's money, made $5 billion last year. Now, there's something wrong there when people are struggling to find and keep a job, losing their homes. There's been about 350 foreclosures, business and homeowners here in Morton Grove. Thankfully, the unemployment rate right in this town has dropped from about 8.8% last January to ending the year at about 6.4%, which still, I mean, that's getting into a more reasonable level, but not for the people who are in that 6.4%. So my view was, let's go where the money is. Let's stop giving tax breaks to companies that move their jobs overseas. The oil and gas companies, as the president mentioned, don't need to continue to get millions and billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies. We can let the pharmaceutical companies negotiate with Medicare to bring those prices down. Right now, they can charge whatever they want. I mean, there are some sensible ways that we can reduce the federal budget, and I do that in a proposal that achieve the same goal. And then, of course, making sure that the military is on the table. Secretary of Defense Gates agrees. He's proposed, again, I guess it's about $75 billion cut in the defense budget. We don't need outdated weapon systems. So I absolutely think we have to take a hard look at the way that we're allocating our money. But I'll be darned if I'm not going to fight to protect that the middle class, it doesn't bear an unfair amount of that burden.
Several years ago, there was discussion of a flat tax, which would get rid of all deductions. You wouldn't be able to hide money, and you would pay a certain percentage. If you made less than $38,000, I think it was, you paid no tax at all if you were a family of four. There was simply everybody paid 14%, which would be for a lot of middle-class Americans a lot less, and for upper-income Americans would be a lot more, because you wouldn't have all the deductions that were taking place. Why don't we do something like that instead of having such a complex, difficult tax code?
Well, let me, I think I'm going to be reinforcing what you say in part by saying that every year there are about $1.1 trillion worth of what we call tax expenditures. Those are the tax deductions, the various tax breaks, etc. But again, they're not totally evenly balanced. I think that the mortgage interest rate deduction, which is mostly used by ordinary families, we could set more of a limit that properties worth, right now it's properties worth over, I think it's $1 million, don't get that. You don't get the deduction for anything over $1 million. But I would hate to see that taken away, because we still have the American dream of home ownership and helping in that way. We certainly want a child tax credit, etc. A lot of analysts who have looked at a flat tax, aside from it being politically, I think, difficult to do, are concerned that the lack of progressivity in the tax still would put an additional burden on middle-class people. And 14%, right now, a tax break for what do you call it, when the income you make from your stocks is about dividends. Sorry, it's about 15%, which is still less than the 35% that the top tax bracket gets. Let me tell you an idea I have, mainly to highlight this disparity in income. Right now, the top tax bracket starts at $350,000, something around there. I mean, that's a lot of money, but you're not super rich when you do that. So whether you're at $350,000 or $350 million, the tax bracket is the same. I want to add some tax brackets, and I want that top tax bracket to be at $1 billion. And people will say, well, that's ridiculous. Nobody makes $1 billion. And there are a fair amount of people in this country now that every year make $1 billion. I mean, people have to, I think, acknowledge right now that we have such a skewed economy. So I think one way to do it, frankly, is to collect more taxes from people who have really benefited from the economy. And I want to tell you, too, that sometimes it's the makers and the takers. Some of the people at the very top don't produce a darn thing. They are gambling on the stock market, on fancy instruments like that they did on the stock market, credit default swaps and all kinds of weird things where they make money losing whether the stock goes up or the stock goes down. And I just feel like we need to call it out. Otherwise, we're going in a dangerous direction, I think.
With these different instruments that allow people to gamble on the stock market and profit from other people's failures, isn't there something that the SEC could do or Congress could do to make those not legal?
Well, we did pass a very important piece of legislation, the Dodd-Frank bill that did rein in some of the excesses on Wall Street. And so we're going to be implementing those. And certainly the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, failed to really monitor those. But most of it was legal, perfectly legal. And while we've closed some of those loopholes and we've tried to make a situation where you can't be too big to fail, we'll see how all that works. The big bonuses are back, The big bonuses on Wall Street are back again. And, it doesn't feel right to me.
Time is the tyrant here, and there are so many things I want to talk about. We've got about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
I want to get into the health care bill, which, as you know, has been a major thorn in some people's side and certainly a point of discussion. Recently, the House voted to repeal it. It obviously did not pass in the Senate by a strict party line vote. There are, you must admit, some provisions in this health care legislation that, one, you and most of the other congresspeople never read, and two, are somewhat onerous.
You're saying I didn't read it? We had a session, several sessions, where we had staff go section by section for anyone who wanted to attend in the Democratic caucus of that piece of legislation. Did I read every word? No, but we had an analysis of every section and paragraph of that bill.
Well, let's take a look at the law of unintended consequences, which I think is something that we all face. We have had, I believe it's 2014, that employers have to either pay a fine or provide the proper health insurance.
Not for small businesses.
No, of 50 employees or more.
Mm-hmm.
If they're paying a fine of, as is listed in the bill, $2,000, if I'm an employer and I've got 100 people, it's a lot cheaper for me to pay $2,000 than to provide health insurance. So then, aren't we forcing people who may currently have health insurance to go into this government program, which is then going to cost us more money and increase the deficit?
Okay, it's not a government program. They go into what is a health care exchange, and they can pick from a number of private insurance plans, or the business itself can utilize the exchange to get a discount because it'll be a bigger pool of businesses to provide. So we think that the government will subsidize people that are low income when they're in the exchange, but they won't do it for people who can afford to buy it. But the packages of coverage, the costs that will be there, the intention is to create a competitive marketplace where those costs for insurance are going to go down. And look, the United States of America, this is at bottom a moral question. Are we going to let people go bankrupt, lose their homes? Healthcare costs are the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy, or die, as about 48,000 Americans do every year for lack of health care? Or are we like every other industrialized country in the world, say health care is a right? It is the role of government to make sure, not necessarily to provide, but to make sure everyone gets health care. I think that this is such an important and historic move forward. Is it perfect? The president said no. He mentioned one provision that businesses have that we all agree should be repealed. Let's fix it. Let's mend it, not end it.
Okay. Looking then at the amendments that may be needed, we also see that there are several large businesses and unions and other groups that are getting exemptions from the health care bill. What would the criterion be that a company would get an exemption, and if they get an exemption from it, then how is this a bill that's going to make the changes you want to have made?
Well, it's been predicted that about 32 million more Americans would be brought into the healthcare system, and it's done in all, various ways. No one is exempt from either having to provide health care or buy health care. I mean, everyone, there is a way that everyone is going to have access to the care and the insurance that they need. And it's complicated. I mean, we're talking about a sixth of the economy. You can't write this in a 20-page bill. I mean, it really, this is a huge deal. And so, we feel that there's fairness for every sector of the economy, and if you talked about unintended consequences, but the fact right now that up to 26 years old, especially with the unemployment, people can stay on the policy, that seniors get a break on their prescription drugs, that you can't be excluded right now if you're a child for a pre-existing condition. These are great things for our country and for millions of families. So we'll be celebrating a year of the passage of the health care bill in March in the House of Representatives, and I think it's only going to get better.
One of the unintended consequences, which is currently being fought in the courts, is forcing people to buy health insurance. How do we do that?
Just the way we do for automobiles. We say that and Dick Armey wrote a kind of a private memo to the Republicans. He heads up a group that opposes the health care bill. And he said, if there is not a mandate for everyone to have health insurance, the whole thing will fall apart. And that's why we should oppose the mandate. And that's true. If people can wait until they get sick in order to get insurance, it's not going to work. We need to have everyone in, nobody out, and especially because we're going to help make it affordable. It's a very sensible and necessary approach to make sure that we have a huge pool of people and that health care, therefore, can be affordable.
Sort of to bring this kind of full circle before we run out of time, we mentioned early on earmarks and things that don't have anything to do with a piece of legislation. There's a provision in the health care bill that if senior citizens sell a house as they're downsizing that's worth more than $500,000, they're hit with an additional 3% tax.
I actually I have been getting some mail on that. That is absolutely something I need to check into. I don't think it's just for seniors. I think it's I don't understand the funding mechanism entirely. So let me promise the viewers that I'm going to look carefully, and if they have concerns and information about this, it's definitely on the top of my agenda.
Well, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come and visit us and give us this information. I have a lot more questions, and I'll bet you have a lot more answers, too.
I'd be happy to come back.
We would love to have you back, and I'd like to thank all of you for listening. We'd like to also remind you that these programs are available on YouTube now. So if you have seen this program, you want to see it again, and you don't want to wait for it to show up on the TV schedule, just go to YouTube. It will be up there, and you can watch the program in its entirety, and I believe you can also see some of our other programs that we've done in the past. Right. If you have any suggestions, please send them to us. We would love to find out what you think of the program. Tell us who you'd like to have as guests, and we will do our best to get them on. We're here to actually answer questions you have about the village, the people who are running it, the people who are in politics and make decisions about the village, as well as other things. So please stay in touch with us. So that's this edition of Must See MGTV. I'm Christopher Michael.